I'm here to present how we got here. And I think that the resource list is a wonderful exploration of that and a chronicle of that. And I thought that perhaps the easiest way to present this, since I have a little gray hair and long in the tooth, is perhaps also track how I got here, because I think that actually is a parallel track, and that started really very much with a faith commitment to get into justice work, and which really got me involved with the homeless early on. While I was in law school, right after law school, and really with just a basic service level mentality, no sense of structures and systemic problems, et cetera. And I heard a discussion one time by anthropologist Kim Hooper, who was putting together a study on homeless folks in the late 80s. And he had this wonderful story that illustrated this juxtaposition between the personal and the systemic, where he asked a homeless guy, how long have you been homeless? And he says, about 2 years. Why are you homeless? Well, I'm homeless because I'm an alcoholic. Well, how long have you been an alcoholic? Oh, about 10 years. Oh, okay. Well, tell me about the first 8 years. Well, I would find a place, I'd drink, I'd get drunk, I'd get kicked out. Then I'd find another place, and I'd drink, I get drunk, and I get kicked out again. And Kim Hooper says, all right, well, but what's been going on the last 2 years since you've been homeless? He says, well, I can't find another place to live. I can't afford it. And this is just the you know, to me, it was an example of how the studies about homelessness at the time were so focused on the personal characteristics of folks who were on the streets, their mental illness, their substance abuse, their trauma history, to explain their homelessness. But we're back burnering the conversions of cheap rental housing to condominiums and market value housing that was going on in a lot of cities in the late 80s. We lost 4.5 million units of affordable housing stock during that time, from 73 to 83, through demolition or structural conversion. Rental rehab expenditures, basically upgrading your rentals if you were a landlord, they doubled from 1982 to 86 compared to the prior 12 years. And essentially this improved and upgraded housing was priced out of the range of the alcoholic that Kim was talking to, and also priced out of the range of folks who were working poor or at the edge of that. Because we entered a period there where real wages, that is wages not adjusted for inflation, did not increase for decades. And meanwhile, housing prices did increase, and the sort of conversions that were most acutely felt in major urban areas were also occurring at the time. At the time also was a pullback in federal aid. In federal housing assistance, public housing monies were reduced. Now, this started even in the Carter administration. Reagan gets a lot of criticism for this, but this kind of neoliberal, moderate, democratic perspective started earlier than that, and we started withdrawing public housing subsidies, switching over to vouchers, withdrawing money from that too, or cutting back on that. And cutting back on community development block grant monies, federal monies for that, federal monies for the home program. And we, at that time, as a homeless advocate, who was with a number of other advocates and understanding that we had this individual issue with that my clients had, or personal issues, but that were operating in this structural context, we'd spend a lot of time yelling at the federal government to increase their subsidies, yelling at the state and local government to make up for those subsidies, and winning a few battles, but not many. Basically, it was getting the scraps from the rich man's table, so to speak. And meanwhile, I was directed by some of my more structurally thinking colleagues to what the city and the state were spending money on. And it did seem like I was spending a lot of time on the business pages and looking at economic development subsidies and beginning to understand that what was going on with increasing the infrastructure in the tourist sector, downtown, and other economic development projects were pushing up property values, and we're making rents higher and making it more difficult for my clients. And yet this was what the city and the state were subsidizing, leaving it to the federal government to pick up the pieces, but the federal government just retrenching very much as far as that goes. Fast forward ahead to the foreclosure crisis. 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. I am working at the place I'm working now, Partners for Dignity and Rights. And there, again, I was placed in a position where I was working with folks who had moved from Occupy Wall Street to something called Occupy Our Homes, and folks who are trying to keep homeowners from being foreclosed upon. And we had a situation here, again, where something is going on behind the curtain. And yet the focus was on the individual, just like the individual homeless guy. It was on the homeowner. Why did the homeowner take out this loan? How could they enter into a mortgage like this? That was impossible, and they knew it. And then pulling back the curtain and seeing, of course, that we had a secondary mortgage market that had expanded into essentially casino gambling, and which was not only packaging mortgages into securities, but then packaging those securities into other securities, and then even betting on what the price of those securities with various swaps, et cetera, as if they were port commodities. We at that time tried to push people towards, hey, we got a problem with housing finance, and there's something called the fixed income security market, which is basically these securities like mortgages that if you invest in, you will, as an investor, get payments back over time, interest, dividends, whatever. It took 100 years for capitalism to get to $36 trillion in the fixed income security market. 100 years, and they reached that 36 trillion mark in 2000. Within 6 years, 2006, it had doubled. Today, it's gone up to $123 trillion. This is the fixed income security market. $123 trillion is about 33% more than what the world produces in GNP. Okay, so we have a lot of, we have surplus capital. We have a lot of money. The NPR once called it the giant pool of money that is circling the globe looking for investment. And this is a point I think that really, when I look back on this and say, how do we get here? There are so many answers, but the big one is because of financialization of housing, and the withdrawal of government from doing anything about that, quite frankly. The banks, as you know, got bailed out. We had Dodd-Frank. Now we have a homeless service industrial complex. My goodness. It's incredible what's happened in those years. We moved in. I started to work with a group called the Baltimore Housing Roundtable, when we were doing this. That we went from the foreclosure work, and then I was working with them on human rights organizing and partnering with them, and they partnered in the 2015, I think 2016, with a labor union, Unite Here, who was organizing hotel workers, and this was they each had a common enemy, and it turned out to be a nice campaign. But in the process, I shouldn't say but while working on that, we really started to make the connection again between economic development that was going on, prices in real estate rising, workers not really getting the benefit or any public benefit to the economic subsidies that the city was giving hotels or downtown developers. And essentially, I remember the union leader saying, we could get living wages, we could get prevailing wages on construction jobs, etc. But if the result of that is going to be on these projects, if the result of the project is going to be higher property values, then our members themselves will get pushed out of the city, and we're going to have a problem politically with our power in the city. Very interesting. And what emerged from this was a look at housing more in the context of development. And that's why that is my title now. I come from a development framework, and we try to deal with housing as part of a development framework, and shifting that development framework essentially to a community-driven development framework rather than a top-down development framework that benefits a few. And in Baltimore, what we came up with for this Fair Development Roundtable, joining with housing advocates, homeless folks, grassroots leaders, and a few labor unions, were principles of development, which I'm not going to get into now, right now, a structural analysis of development, and really a realization that we had to, whatever we did tactically, we had to understand these structures. And I've got about 8 minutes left or 7 minutes left. I'm going to just look at two of these structures and just say, again, this is an answer of how we got here. And I'm going to share the screen and show you some slides. I'm going to look at two structures of three. There are three things that got us here. One is a fetishism around higher property values, which creates a political problem, a political power problem for those on the outside. Two is speculative capital, which I've talked about already. And three is continued racialized lending. But I'm not going to get into the lending so much now, but let me just deal with the slides for the first two. And I'll do slideshow. Here we go. I think, well, I don't know what you'll see, but nevertheless, I think you can see the slides, right? And this first slide is essentially what rising property values mean. And they mean city property tax revenue goes up, homeowner equity goes up, developer profit opportunities go up, as do investment capital profit opportunities and bank profit opportunities as well. But it also means that you're going to get increased rents and evictions, increased homelessness, higher property acquisition costs, increased risk of businesses and local business and elderly homeowner displacement, et cetera. I think we understand that. We also, I think we understand that this is not an either or, all right? The higher property values do have, this is not an evil, so to speak. The challenge here is how do you balance this and serve everybody? And how do you have a universal and inclusive development plan? And the difficulty in fighting for that, and gets into political economy, because this is one thing I think that we learned very clearly in Baltimore, and that is that there is a very difficult political alliance, almost a holy trinity going on here, and at the top of it are the local politicians. And I know we have, I'm not painting all local politicians in this. We're talking about state and local politicians who have basically, they benefit from three things here. One is property tax revenue, which comes into the local development coffers when property values go up. They benefit from the votes of resident homeowners when home equity increases, and they also they benefit from the campaign contributions of what I would call the real estate industrial complex, the developers, the speculators, etc. So these rents, equity, and profits, that they all really combine so that you have homeowners, you have developers, and you have local politicians who actually are very much in favor of increasing property values. And again, that gets us to this problem right there. So that is one structural issue. The other structural issue, I'm going to skip to the next one. I'm not going to go to solutions to this, because I'm just here to tell you the problem. I could go to solutions, but that's not my job right now. And that is the rise of speculative capital, which I've pointed out. And we're talking here about the little dots on this arrow are LLCs, limited liability companies. And in this case, I'm talking about those that are into bigger finances, like serial LLCs, et cetera. I don't want to really drill down too much on that. REITs are real estate investment trusts, statutory trusts, private equity. These are all entities that pool money together, and then they invest in real estate. And where do they invest? They invest in your community. They invest in Baltimore, they invest all over the world, and they're constantly, this giant pool of money is going into these entities. And that also has an impact on property values, as we know. So again, we have the increase in rents and possible homelessness and just property acquisition costs going through the roof, et cetera. And I just want to track back a little bit and look at where is the speculative capital coming from. Just a bunch of rich people who got excess in this giant pool of money? Well, no, yes and no. I mean, private pensions and retirement account investments. This is all this first tier up here. Public pension funds investments, even my son's, I looked at my son's college fund investments, and lo and behold, like in that all that fine print, I see, oh my goodness, they're involved in some real estate here, insurance funds, mutual funds. And the second tier here is the entities, that those receptacles, those pooled capital entities, I would call them, the serial LLCs, the REITs, the real estate investment trusts, the statutory trusts, the private equity, and the fixed income securities. And these entities actually end up operating at your local level as limited liability corporations, limited partnerships, other corporate entities. And oftentimes it's very hard to find out who is behind the capital. So those are those are the slides. the brief account of my my trail, and I think to sum up how we got here, it's been essentially a financialization of capitalism, quite frankly, but very much a financialization of housing. A real political alliance around higher property values, to the and not a real good sense of how to balance that, and how to figure out how to include folks who are being pushed out because of that, and essentially, yeah, that I think that's it. Those two big things, and a retrenchment, with the public sector, whether it's the federal government, primarily the federal government, but also just a retrenchment by state and local governments too, which we can get into why that is philosophically. But I'm at 20 minutes and 42 seconds, and that is all I get.